Hey, Center Grace family, happy Wednesday. We are back for another installment of a weekly devotional. And I want to just at the outset of this video tell you something that maybe you didn't know about me. So I've told you a million times that I'm not great at math. And it's definitely true. But one thing I can just crush is my multiplication facts. When I was in 5th and 6th grade, I remember routinely being given every day as I would go home a multiplication sheet where I would have to practice my times tables. And over the course of time, I got really good at it. You could ask me to this day any multiplication fact up to 12 times 12, and I'm going to do a great job with it. Because one of the things that's just true, the more that we reinforce things, the better we learn them. And over the course of these many months, I think we've been doing these videos now since the beginning of COVID back last March. And one of the things that maybe you haven't noticed, but that I just want to make more explicit today is that we're trying to reinforce in every way that we can our commitment to discipleship. You hear us talk about disciples and discipleship all the time. We've given you a number of definitions of what a disciple is. A disciple is a person who is being with Jesus, becoming like him and learning to do the things that he does. Or a disciple is a person that is experiencing gospel renewal and that's learning to live in the way of Jesus in his or her context and is teaching others to do the same. We've said that discipleship is like moving from unbelief to belief in Jesus in every area of life. But one of the other things that we've said throughout all of this time and this talk about disciples is we've identified what we believe are 5 characteristics of disciples. That a disciple is a person who, again, experiences gospel renewal. And we've talked a number of times through these videos about that. A disciple is a person who grows in their affection for God. We've talked about that. A disciple is a person who learns to see all of their life wrapped up in the truth of the biblical story. We've talked about that. The 4th characteristic of a disciple is where we're going to start today in this next series of videos, but that's that a disciple experiences and seeks transformation in their relationships in life. And then the 5th thing that we'll explore in the coming weeks too is that a disciple wants to make other disciples. But as we've been trying to reinforce these things, and as we've looked at each one of those different characteristics, of those 5 characteristics, again, what we're trying to do is get us so familiar with the language of discipleship and so familiar with the characteristics of a disciple that we begin to see those things taking shape in our own lives. That's what our ultimate desire and our goal is. So today, as we begin this new little section or series on disciples experiencing and seeking relationship transformation, I want us to think about as we start what this means for our relationship both to ourselves and to God. And then over the coming weeks, we're also going to explore how we experience relationship change to others. But those are the 3 areas in which we're going to experience change in our relationship: the way that we relate to ourselves, the way that we relate to God, and the way that we relate to others. And today, in order to do that, I want to try to make this as simple as possible. I want to give you 3 passages of Scripture, 2 pictures, and 1 truth. So 3, 2, 1 is what we're going to look at today. 3 scriptures, and here they are. The first one is Luke chapter 6, verses 43 through 45. The second one is Jeremiah 17, 5 through 10. And the third scripture is John 15, 1 through 5. So again, 3 scriptures that we're going to look at. One of the things that Jesus loved to do is he loved to talk in parable. He loved to actually give everyday kinds of descriptions to what life was like. And in Luke 6, 43 through 45, Jesus gave one of his favorite pictures or descriptions, and that's going to lead us into our first picture. And it's the picture of a tree. Listen to what Jesus says. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor are grapes picked from bramble bushes. The good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure in his heart produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Now, what you may have not known is that Jesus is picking up a second passage of Scripture, and that's from Jeremiah 17, 5 through 10. And I won't read it for you, but I'd encourage you to go and look at it. Because there, in the Old Testament, Jeremiah is actually giving 2 different pictures of 2 different kinds of trees. One that is a thorny, prickly bush that's drying up and about to die. And the other one is a tree that is flourishing. But the reality is, in that passage in Jeremiah, is that both of those trees are in the desert. They're in a place where, honestly, a tree shouldn't live. But the second tree, that one that is flourishing, it's got deep roots, and it's sought out a pure stream of water, which again is ultimately, I think, a picture of God, his presence, his scripture, his word. But that leads us to, of our two pictures, that leads us to our first picture. And that's the picture, and you guys know I'm not an artist, but the picture of a tree. What Jesus is talking about in Luke 6 and what Jeremiah is talking about in Jeremiah 17 is the fact that we live from the inside out. We live from the inside out, but one of the things that Jeremiah also indicates, and Jesus, I think, is getting at here in Luke chapter 6, is that while we live from the inside out, in and of ourselves, we can't figure ourselves out. Jeremiah puts it this way. He says that our heart, above all things, that root system of our lives, if our life is like a tree, our hearts are deceitful and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Jeremiah asks in verse 9. But here's the good news. It comes in verse 10. God says, I search out the heart. I alone know what's going on in the depths, in the root system of life. Let me give you a second picture. And again, I can't draw, so forgive me. But the second picture is a picture of like a car. And again, that looks more like a tractor, but just work with me here, okay? So imagine that this is a car and the hood is up on the car. And imagine that this is you. You're standing here, you're looking into the car, trying to figure out what's going on because you hear the car starting to make some really funny noises. Now, one of the things that you probably do know is that when your car starts making really bad noises, you can't just take it to the car wash and get it cleaned up on the outside. You can't just spray the wheels and hope that everything goes better. You're going to have to take it to a mechanic. Now, again, if you follow both of the pictures, this is a present day picture, but it's trying to say the same thing. I'm trying to say the same thing that Jeremiah and Jesus are saying about our tree picture. We can't fully understand what's going on the inside. And so how does discipleship begin to transform our relationships? Well, it transforms our relationship both with ourselves and with God. It allows us to be honest with ourselves, to admit the fact that we actually can't peer into the depths of our hearts and figure it out on our own. That is so countercultural to today. God is going to have to do that search. That's why you can think of countless scriptures where the psalmists and others will say, God, search out my heart. Know me, examine my heart and my mind. Help me to understand what's going on in the depths. Because it's not just that you can figure out what's going on the inside. You need a master mechanic to be able to come alongside and look into it. And that's Jesus. He's the master mechanic who can help you understand what's going on in the very depths of who you are, and that you can then begin to be honest about what he sees in the midst of your heart and your life. That begins to change the way that you think about yourself. It begins to change the way that you even perceive God. You realize that and this leads to our one truth, you begin to realize, as Jack Miller, the great Presbyterian pastor, once used to say, that he says, cheer up, we are far worse than we ever could have imagined. And yet, we are more deeply loved than we could have ever dared hope. That is the one truth that I want you to remember. While the fact of the matter is, we're worse off. We can't fully understand what's going on in our heart, but God does. And when God comes and we enter into that relationship with him, God says, you know what? It's worse than you could have imagined. It's like going to the mechanic and the mechanic telling you, you're going to need a completely new engine or a completely new transmission. But the good news is that though things are worse than we could have actually imagined, or we just thought we needed a detail, we just thought we needed some new fruit stapled to the outside of the tree. No, we need a new root system. But Jesus is the master mechanic who can do the engine work, who can work on the transmission of our hearts and our lives. But that leads us to this third passage of Scripture. In John 15, Jesus says that his Father is the vine dresser. He's the one who lovingly takes care of the plant. And Jesus says that he is the vine. We are the branches. We're attached to him. Jesus is the one who is doing the work in the depths. We're far worse off than we could have imagined, but we're more deeply loved than we ever could have hoped. That is the one truth that we need to remember. We've got 3 scriptures, 2 pictures, and 1 truth. But what this all demonstrates is that when we grow in our discipleship with Jesus, when we become his followers, it transforms the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we relate to God. I can be honest about my sin before God, within myself, and even to other people. And that begins to change everything. So see, as disciples of Jesus, we're seeking that kind of relationship transformation. The transformation of the way that we relate to ourselves. We don't have to blame other people. We don't have to excuse ourselves. We don't have to pretend like the problems don't exist deep down in our hearts. We can be honest with ourselves and before God because he knows what's going on, even when we don't. He's the master mechanic. He's the true vine dresser. And we are far worse off than we ever would have imagined. But we're more deeply loved than we ever could have hoped. Church, we love you guys. We're praying for your discipleship. And we look forward to seeing you on Sunday.